Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul, Liberty Hill Comics. Still working on this copy of Superman pre-war Golden Age Superman number 9. This is Noah's book. We've been doing tape removal on it for a long time already, hours, and I needed to take a break. I don't want to leave the cover in the Bestine, which is the solvent we were using. It's a good... It's on the T's chart near hexane, works similarly. I did not want to leave it in that indefinitely, so I put a piece of Hollytex over the top, and then I put this between paper towels with some pressure. When you do that, it is very important that you don't get anxious and go back and check your work, because see this area here? This is actually where tape has already been removed, but it looks like there's still tape there, and that's because the adhesive is still sitting there. If I were to go in here and try to peel the Hollytex back, I'm going to peel that off, and we obviously don't want that. So it's very important, if you use this technique, you cannot check your work, you can't go back and look at it. It's now in between these, and until we reapply solvent to loosen that adhesive up, you need to leave it that way. A couple of other really quick notes. I'll be using the same tools today. These are number 5 forceps stainless. I had a couple of questions about why I use the stainless steel spatula as opposed to the Teflon coated one, and the answer is pretty simple. This edge of the stainless steel spatula is a little bit over 20 thousandths, and that's the edge that I'm using to get underneath the tape carrier. And if I look at that same edge on my Teflon coated spatula, it's significantly thicker, almost twice as thick. And it's just thick enough that it does not get underneath the tape carrier quite as well as the stainless steel one. All right, so we're going to be just continuing the work. Those of you that have been along for the ride have already seen me doing this for hours and hours, but here we go. As I said before, we want to wet it more or less as quickly as we can because we do not want to encourage tide marks. So I get the whole book like that, and I am in fact going to speed the process. I'm going to flip it and do the same thing on the other side, just to make sure we get the whole thing wet all at once. All right, now I'm actually going to be working on the Versa. That's where we left. This is where we have the most tape left. As you recall from the last series of videos, we still have tape all the way down the spine here on the Versa. Most of the rest of the tape has been removed. We have a little bit on the obverse in this area here, which we will get to. All right, we've let this soak long enough. We should be able to peel this layer of Hollytex off safely now. I have a second photography tray here to put it into because this Hollytex does wick the solvent up really well, and it comes off quite wet, so I don't want to drip that all over my studio. Now we can get back to work on the carrier where we still have some left and see what we can do with this book. Now, as I recall, we had freed up the carrier in several places along here. Yep. But that we had also recognized that the paper's already been removed from the rest of the paper in several places. I'm looking for like a good place to start where we have paper intact underneath the carrier, but really all along here it's not the case. This whole layer, the paper is just bonded to this carrier. And there's going to be a significant loss. So maybe we'll try this side. Did we already remove the carrier over here? No, we still have carrier here. This was the side that on the exterior was actually worse. So I didn't have high hopes for this. But maybe we'll get lucky. Sometimes the old paper surprises you. Here I've got a little spot where I've got the carrier coming up from the paper cleanly. So we'll try to build on that. There we go. That's good news. See if we can just continue to expand that. We'll try to go both further in and also further down the document. The reason I'm holding now carrier on both sides is because I'm putting upward pressure. I'm really trying to make sure I'm putting upward pressure with the spatula. I'm really trying to make sure that to the extent possible, I'm getting between the paper and the carrier. And you see here, this is all carrier, but you get here and it's sort of cloudy. That's just the barest layer of paper coming up. And as I go this way, it's more and more. And as you saw when we're down here in this area, well, on this side anyway, there's just no way to slide anything between the carrier and the paper because that top layer of paper has already been removed from the paper underneath. So that's the path of least resistance. You have carrier, you have a thin layer of paper that's already been ripped off, and then you have the body of the paper. So when you remove the carrier, it's taking that thin layer with it because there's no way, it's like the weak link is here where it's already been ripped and removed from the layer underneath. That weak link is always going to be where it comes apart. So we do the best we can, and sometimes you can come back and remove that thin layer from the carrier and reattach it with, the same techniques we would use to mend a tear to the rest of the paper. But sometimes it's so thin and ephemeral you can't even do that. So it just depends. We know around the staples it's always difficult because that paper's been stressed and is thin. Made some decent progress there. But then it started to be where the paper wanted to come up. So I'll just jump down a little further and try to work back to that spot. I certainly don't want to make that situation any worse. There we go, that was successful. Now we'll see if we can move in this direction again. Those forceps are really sharp, so much so that they'll cut through the carrier, through the plastic tape layer. Which sometimes is fine, but right here what I'm trying to do is really get through these layers. We still have multiple layers of carrier here, as you know. I edited some of the earliest video that I did, and I was watching it, and when I flipped the page over, I could see light through here, through a lot of this. So I know in our walkthrough we pointed that out, and we said it almost looks like it's been cut and re-taped back together, and then I said I don't think it has been, but it almost looks like it has. It's definitely, if it wasn't cut, it was torn. Much of this spine was already separated and then returned to the other piece with the tape. Just more evidence of how bad this book is, why there was so much tape on it, why somebody took the time to basically laminate this cover with tape. I think the answer is because it was really pretty. The paper was very weak. This is your little reminder, boys and girls, to, when you do this sort of work in a well-ventilated area. Make sure you have a comfortable seating position with good ergonomic support. Make sure you remember to breathe, because you can easily spend so much time doing this that you start to get tense. You hold your breath. These are not good things for you, which means ultimately they're not good things for the comic. Sort of like that old saying, you can't love other people until you love yourself. Can't care for the comic until you're caring properly for yourself, right? Can't improve the comic unless you're maintaining yourself. This paper's just so mushy down here. We've posted already the first few videos of this series, and so I've gotten some feedback. And some folks have commented on how painful it is to watch some of this paper come up. And believe me, I feel you. Whatever pain you're experiencing from afar, it's definitely more acute for me. You know, I'm experiencing it firsthand, and it is kind of brutal, but I have to keep reminding myself that we're not the ones who did this to the book, right? Like we're here preserving the book long term. Preservation is our goal. If we do nothing with this tape, it will eventually destroy the paper. And this is paper that is, you know, it's survived this far, 80 years in a certain state. And if we do nothing, it's going to be gone, because it will be destroyed by the things that it's already been subjected to. And so what we're doing is the best thing we could possibly do to preserve this paper and to preserve the book long term. So even though it is brutal to watch, and I don't like it either, this damage has already been done. For those of you that don't necessarily believe that this layer had already been torn off the book, listen carefully as I slide this through here. If I were tearing paper fibers, you would hear them. The fact that I slide this through here silently means that we know that those paper fibers were already torn long ago. And there is a different sound of the tearing of the paper fibers versus the tearing of this carrier. When I was using the forceps, some of what I was doing, you could hear, was tearing through this carrier. And this is plastic. It's older, brittle plastic. It has a crinkly sound when you're cutting through it. It's slightly different than paper fibers, which have that very distinctive rip sound that we're familiar with. If I were destroying the paper fibers as I went, we would be hearing that sound, but we're not hearing that sound. And the reason why is because these rips have already been made long ago, and they're just being held together by all the tape. And as we remove the tape, there's nothing left to hold that torn paper in place, and so we're seeing it come apart. But I am not tearing paper fibers as I'm doing this. Again, if I was, you would hear it. And you're not hearing it because all we're really doing is revealing the damage that was done long ago. And it is not a pretty sight, and I recognize that. But it's the step we have to go through to get where we want to be, which is ultimately with a book that is conserved long term and is the best it could possibly be. So we're going to do all we can to get it there. we're down to just this paper that's here. It's all on the carrier. And yeah, it's completely loose, so maybe there's a possibility of pulling some of this back off the carrier when we're done. But there's the last major piece of carrier from this side, and I'm wondering if it took carrier from the other side with it. It does have a fair amount of paper left, and again, maybe there's some pieces there that we can scrape off, but for the most part, this is like literally microns thin. It's just taken the layer with the ink, and there's really no volume of paper pulp here. Here there's more paper pulp, but this is the paper that was really soft. You can see here where the paper pulp was just more or less sort of disintegrated, right? And then this is just literally the ink. The ink has probably left the paper and dissolved into the adhesive between the carrier and the paper. That's why these areas with the black ink just refuse to stay with the paper, because that ink had actually already left the paper a while ago. All right, so there's a major piece of carrier off.